And we also showed off a simple data link report in the previous videos, and what we see here is an earlier version of that report before any of the data queries were added. We're going to configure some of the data link queries to populate this report with the contextualized PI data for our pump assets, and that'll allow us to do that fleet-wide comparison between our pump assets. We can look at the maximum bearing temperatures over a time range, or the suction pressures, or the calculated efficiencies for all the pumps over a given time range, as opposed to trying to do it by flipping through the individual dashboards for each of the pumps. Now, we've been pretty focused on the pump efficiency and a couple of these measured values, the suction pressure and the bearing temperature. So that's really what we're going to focus in here. And recall that the bearing temperature and the suction pressures are values that are actually being measured out in the field, whereas this hourly average efficiency is the result of a calculation that's being done automatically on the PI system that's based off of that sensor data. So we're taking some of that sensor information, coupling it with some of the nameplate information, some of that data that we can get out of the pump manual, and then creating that or calculating that average efficiency, turning it into something a little bit more actionable. Now, everything that's highlighted in yellow in this report is an input for the data link queries that we're going to configure. We'll use the start and the end time up here, and this is just to feed the queries with the time range, and we can change that as needed. We can increase the time range or decrease it based off of what sort of window we want to monitor. We're also going to be utilizing the list of pumps to feed the queries, basically to tell us what we want to grab the data from, and then the actual data items there themselves, the bearing temperature, the suction pressure, and the hourly average efficiency. Once we actually start configuring these queries, you'll see that they're all very similar. So the configuration process, once you've decided what it is you want to grab, is pretty simple and straightforward. Now, for instance, for the bearing temperature, we would go to our calculated data query up here, which is within that PI data link add-in, and we can see all of the values that we need to add into this. So we need that data item, that's just the bearing temperature. The route path will actually tell us where we want to actually grab this data, where the pump actually resides within that asset structure. And we're using some concatenation right now to fill that out automatically for us based off of some information on the sheet. So if we select this, we'll basically select that route path and say we want this value for pump 1. Now we're going to grab the start time and the end time, and we're also going to set the calculation mode. So in this case, we actually want a maximum value. Then if we click OK, that'll actually fill in the query, and we'll see that we actually have a value there now for pump 1. And we can also go in and do this for the suction pressure. So the same sort of thing. We go in and we look at the route path. We can grab the data item that we're interested in, fill in our start and our end time, and then again set the calculation mode to the maximum. We'll click OK there, and then that'll actually fill out our value there. And then we want to go and do the same thing for this average hourly efficiency. And in this case, we're actually going to change the calculation mode. So we're going to stick with filling out the data items and the route paths just as we did before. And then we can configure our start and our end time. And instead of a maximum, we're actually going to grab just the average, because that's what we're interested in for this time-weighted average. We click OK, that's going to fill in our hourly average efficiency for this. Now you'll notice that we pulled all of this in for that single pump asset. We can do a simple drag and drop here to expand this out to the other pump assets, as long as we first need to go in and actually make a modification to the formula. So rather than locking this to our single pump, which is what we're seeing right over here, this G8, we actually want to remove the $ in front of the 8, do a Control-Shift-Enter, and then we can go ahead and drag and drop this down, and it'll actually change. So now it's grabbing all those values for the pump. And we'll do the same thing over here for the maximum suction pressure. We'll also do the same thing for the hourly average efficiency. And we can just click and drag and drop these down, and we'll have the report that we had generated before. And the main thing to see with this report is that we have similar maximum values for the bearing temperature and the suction pressure. Our efficiency is really what varies between these different pump assets. So based on this report here, we might actually zero in on pump 6 as something that we actually need to go take a look at, because the average efficiency is much lower on this asset than the others. Now in the next video, we're going to show how we can further streamline these reports by offloading some of the condition monitoring logic to the analytics engine within the PI system. And that'll allow us to flag out-of-band events as they occur, and then we can search that event database as opposed to having to go through and sift through all the archive information to find the anomalous out-of-band portions of the data manually.